It's time for the Russ Belville Show's Cannabis Q&A with Dr. Mitch Earleywine. Dr. Earleywine is a professor of psychology at the State University of New York at Albany and a leading author and researcher on cannabinoids and health, who pins the Ask Dr. Mitch column for High Times Magazine. Get your questions ready in our live chat or call in to 971-533-7111 now.
All right, welcome back, everybody. We are live coming to you from Boise, Idaho, and we are speaking with Dr. Mitch Earleywine, who is in Albany, New York. How you doing, Dr. Mitch?
Having a nice day. You?
Oh, good day so far, aside from being in Idaho. My blood is a controlled substance here, Dr. Mitch. It's got me scared.
I understand your fear.
Well, we just returned from the 710 Cup, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that with you, Dr. Mitch. But before we get started, we always give Dr. Mitch a chance to open up with what the latest developments are in cannabis science while we get our questions ready in our chat room. So what's new, Dr. Mitch?
A new paper out in Cancer Causes Control, which I know is the craziest name for a journal ever, but it's marijuana use and risk of lung cancer, a 40-year cohort study. And we've talked before about Don Tashkin's data in Los Angeles, where at a 30-year follow-up, it looked like cannabis certainly was not increasing risk for lung cancer. And now this one suggests a twofold risk for heavy cannabis users, and I'm sure it's going to get a whole lot of media attention. I just want to let people know ahead of time how to combat this. First and foremost,
we're going to combat it with sound effects, I believe.
Yes. First and foremost, this is not a sample where there were a lot of folks who used cannabis and only cannabis, and so they tried to statistically control for the tobacco effect in hopes of then estimating what cannabis would be like if you only smoked that. It's sort of like those fights you used to get with in junior high where people say, well, if you had my bone structure, you'd weigh more, or something like that. It's just a real nonsense approach to a very difficult problem. That said, they do have their statistics done well, and there is a doubling of risk for lung cancer in their heavy users. And heavy users were, try not to laugh, people who'd used 50 times in their lives.
Wow.
That said, I really feel like the take-home message is if you are going to smoke anything, cannabis is certainly the thing. And cigarettes, man, they will kill you. And then I can get on my usual soapbox about vaporizers, but I think all our listeners know if you're willing to, have a little splurge for a vaporizer, I think 40 years from now you'll really thank yourself.
And that's great segue for my questions on this 710 Cup that I was just out at Denver. For one thing, I'm seeing a development of a lot of these vaporizer pens, vape pens, different ways of consuming these concentrated hash oils. And one concern I heard raised was the worry about whether or not they're being made with cheap parts or we're getting burned metal. And we talked a little bit about that last week. But the development that I wanted to bring up, oh my goodness, I saw a tweet come across from our friend Kevin Sabet, who was reacting to a Washington Post story on concentrates and hash and how, now that weed is legal in Washington and Colorado, that there's a question, is hash legal? And Sabet said something to the effect is, if this is the direction we're going, we're in big trouble because dabbing is deadly.
Well,
deadly, Dr. Mitch. It's deadly.
This is why it's hard to take prohibitionists seriously. I actually just spoke to Mallory Laughlin, my grad student, who some of you guys know from the conference that Normal had here in Philadelphia, and she has the first dab data that we collected. And what a surprise, no one reported dying from dabbing.
No deaths reported yet.
So I still think we're safe as far as that's concerned. We do have the occasional, hey, I got burned on a nail and things like that. We're not seeing higher rates of dependence, though, or anything like that. I am apprehensive about the concentrates and things like that just because it's a really rapid dosage, and anytime you change your blood concentration of anything that fast, it's always going to have a big impact. We have seen folks get a little woozy, shall we say, under the circumstances. I keep coming back to this, and I hate to sound like my father, but damn, the pot is so good now. Do you really need to go out with this? So that's my real feeling. But no, dabbing is not deadly. These pens, so I got to see one of these when I was at the Boston Freedom Rally, and it's a delightful gizmo. I think it's really interesting how folks have worked them out. But you don't want heat next to plastic and then suck that in. I mean, it's not a great idea. So I completely understand some of the apprehensions, but we don't have the data to point towards, oh, this is dangerous yet.
You know, I in walking around the 710 Cup this weekend in Denver, I kind of got the feeling it was a younger set than when I go to a Cannabis Cup or a normal convention. It was definitely a younger set. Being 45 myself, I definitely felt like an outlier there. And one of the things I hear repeated, or maybe it's just a feeling that I get from the emerging 710 culture, is their kind of disdain for plant material. They kind of present it as, we're doing dabs because it's safer, because you're just getting the THC and the cannabinoids that you want. You're not having to ingest a bunch of smoke with burning vegetable matter, and that the dabs are somehow cleaner or better for you. What's your commentary on that?
So the data that Mallory gathered suggests that a lot of folks really do think that. And in theory, that is the case. But I would say the argument for the vaporizer may be the happy medium, in that you would still have exposure only to cannabinoids and mist without that increased elevation in dosage. And if I thought folks really were doing, half a dab and waiting 15 minutes and then doing the other half, I would say, what's the big deal? But it's a little bit like watching folks do shots in a drinking game rather than having a nice sip of whiskey.
Yeah, and I saw that myself with, we were kind of making a joke about dibs, dabs, and globs as far as how much one was taking at one particular time. And I was, interviewing this weekend some guys that, they're putting 1 gram, 2 grams of this oil in one puff and taking it all in. I was just amazed by that.
Well, and in all honesty, how high is high? I just feel like it's not a good use of oil.
Yeah, and I start to get the feeling, as someone in the chat room was mentioning the cost of this, and from my perspective, we've talked about just with flower, taking a break now and then to bring your tolerance down so that a little bit will do you what a lot does right now. I worry about these guys that are doing these 1 gram globs and 2 gram globs, that you're setting your tolerance up so high that you end up kind of wasting a lot of the product in the long run.
Well, and in truth, it's funny because at low doses we do not see the tolerance development that we see at high doses, and especially with rapid administration like this. So the acute tolerance alone, how much it would take to get a little bit higher even within that smoking session, is rapid. I actually got tenure showing that with alcohol, but the fact that you could literally save money by doing less. Unless these folks are a hell of a lot richer than I am, I think that's the kind of information we need to spread.
All right, we're speaking with Dr. Mitch Earleywine. We take your live questions on our phone line at 971-533-7111. We also take them in our chat room, where we've got our first live question here, which is, I got to scroll down, almost 50 wanted to know, does the vaporizing temperature affect the THC to CBD ratio? That is, if you do lower temps, do you get more CBD to THC, or how does that work?
Well, so it turns out CBD vaporizes a little higher temperature than THC. And in truth, some of the strains we have just don't have that much CBD anyway, so it's hard to know exactly. And then I don't often trust the thermometers on some of these vaporizers. So I feel like, the thing to do is to make sure you're not getting any smoke in the tube or whatever mechanism is coming in. And then when you're blowing out, to just have a fine blue mist, really, not smoke that in your exhalation, and you should be doing fine.
All right. We've got a live question here as well from my friend Lindsay. Lindsay Reinhardt is, of course, the chief petitioner for the Compassionate Idaho to get medical marijuana here in the state, and she suffers from multiple sclerosis. And you had a MS-related question, Lindsay?
I did. I was reading up on the newest studies saying that cannabis cannot delay or does not delay the disease progression of multiple sclerosis, and I beg to differ. I feel that the wrong compound was tested, that they ran all the studies on THC instead of CBD, and I was wondering what your thoughts on that are.
In fact, my thoughts aren't even that pharmacological. Those studies didn't have a big enough sample to actually come to the conclusion. You would have had to basically not have MS anymore in order for those results to be statistically significant. I mean, it was such an unfair test and such a lame way of going about suggesting that these things allegedly do not work. That said, we do have data showing that alleviation of some of the symptoms is already there. It would take a really big sample and a long longitudinal follow-up in order to say that it actually interfered with, the rate of progression of the disease. And I think in part, the people who could fund that just don't seem to want to.
No, of course they don't want to. So with respect to that, the CBD part of Lindsay's question, do we even really know if CBD or THC have any disease progression capabilities?
Pharmacologically, it would not be impossible for either one of them. It's a neat antioxidant mechanism, although not a direct one, to some of the MS-related, if not causal, at least symptoms. And then CBD, in part because it's hitting those CB2 receptors and the immune system more generally, we're not sure if it would balance some things out in some of the autoimmune components often associated with MS. So I think it is, if not probable, at least possible. And again, we would just need a big enough sample in order to really take a look.
Well, we can give you a sample N equals 1. Lindsay, why don't you tell them a little bit about how it's helped you?
Sure. So for me, having a higher intake of CBDs has made a huge difference. And since they raided my house and took my kids and my cannabis, not having the CBDs, which was pretty specific. There was THC as well. I haven't been able to function nearly the same. It's been extremely hard to think and to process just pretty much anything. I know that CBD is, the government holds the patent for the antioxidant part and the neuroprotective part. And there were previous studies done, I think in 2011, that had said that CBD would delay disease progression. And I always counted on that. With having cannabis treatment, I was functioning and able to take part in my life, and now that I don't have it, I'm not.
It just makes me want to weep. Those anti-inflammatory effects are extremely well documented. CBD itself isn't even psychoactive. I feel like it's just raging. It's really impossible to even comprehend that the government could be this inhumane.
Yeah, it's something we're going to keep fighting, and Lindsay's going to keep fighting for Idaho, and we're going to talk about that next when we come up our next segment. We're going to do Active's Agenda. But, folks, if you didn't get your chance to talk to Dr. Mitch, get your question in on this segment, you can always go to our contact page, 420radio.org/contact.
420 friendly sponsors. Support these advertisers because their ad money goes straight to the Russ Belville Show.
So thank you, Dr. Mitch, for joining us here on our remote show from Idaho. When we come back, Activist Agenda.
Stay tuned to the Russ Belville Show,
next week.
the voice of the marijuana nation.